Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, we'd like to welcome you to today's Interconnection Process Enhancements 5.0 Working Group meeting to discuss an addendum to the final proposal. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. I'm joined online by Danielle Mills, Principal for Infrastructure Policy Development, Bob Emmert, Director for Interconnection Resources, and Ryan Cox, a Queue Management Specialist. Just have a few friendly reminders here before we get started. Today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. And this meeting is intended to open dialogue and engage different perspectives. So please keep your comments professional and respectful today, and also please try to keep your comments and questions succinct so that we're able to hear from everyone. For accessing closed captioning on the bottom left of your screen, you can find that, and then Teller Transparency Viewer is on the bottom right of your screen. Just be sure to refresh that before viewing, and we'll have that Transparency Viewer up shortly. We welcome and look forward to your engagement and participation in today's meeting. And for raising your hand during the meeting, the raise hand icon is directly at the bottom of your WebEx screen. And if you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. And please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making a comment. And you can also send your comments and questions via chat to all panelists. And if you need any technical assistance during the meeting today, please send a chat to the event producer and Teller Events. Today, we're going to be hearing about the Interconnection Process Enhancements 5.0 final proposal, including the deliverability for energy-only projects and also changes to queue management. Danielle, Bob, and Ryan are going to lead us through this discussion, and then we'll wrap up for the day for next steps. And this slide here shows a visual representation of where we are in the stakeholder process. We're here where the arrow is at the end of the develop stage. So with that, I will go ahead and turn things over to Danielle Mills to get us started.
Thank you, Christina. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining on short notice. We did want to convene one more stakeholder call just to walk you through a couple of final changes that we're considering making to the final proposal. These will probably come to you in the form of an addendum to the final proposal. Hopefully that doesn't cause any flashbacks for any of you, but we do think that there are a couple areas that just warrant a little more stakeholder feedback and discussion before we take this issue to the board. So just to clarify, there are several items in the IPE 5.0 topic, or IPE 5.0 final proposal that will proceed unchanged. We're still not planning to move forward with any of these items, the non-LSE commercial interest piece, the modified cap on the full allocation election, incorporation of distribution system interconnection projects, and scoring to get to the 150% study limit process. ISOs and affected system process modifications, modifications to the commercial readiness deposit due date, and the discontinuation of the pre-application process and modifications to the executive dispute committee. So as you recall, there were proposals in the final proposal on each of these items. We are going to kind of freeze those items as they are in the final proposal and still plan to move those forward to the board. Other items that were previously considered in IPE 5.0 and not included in the final proposal will continue to not be included in the final proposal, but these we're proposing to move forward to the board as written in the final proposal. But there are a couple of items that Bob and Ryan will get into that we do feel warrant more stakeholder discussion. That's the element of allowing energy-only projects that are operating to seek transition plan deliverability, and the other is some clarifications to the commercial viability criteria element. So with that, I believe, turn it over to Bob on the next slide. And maybe just before Bob goes, we'll see if there are any questions on general scope and what we're discussing today.
Yeah, look, I'm not seeing any hands raised, and I'm not seeing any questions coming in the chat.
Okay, thanks, Christina.
Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? And good afternoon, everybody. So as we reviewed the comments that we received on the final proposal, probably the biggest item that got us thinking to actually do another paper or do an addendum to the final proposal was a comment that we received on this topic. That the comment was that someone suggested that we actually allow operational energy only projects to get an allocation basically in the conditional allocation process, something similar to that. And as I thought about that and thought about how there was concerns about energy only projects, that it's not a given they're going to get an allocation, and having to get a 5-year PPA to get the allocation, that I actually thought, gosh, I wish I would have thought of that. That's actually not a bad idea. And so got together and kind of talked about restructuring how we were proposing this. So what we landed on is that energy-only projects that are in commercial operation, regardless of cluster, can seek a TBD allocation in the PPA allocation group if they have a PPA, or if not, to the conditional allocation group. And we will actually do away with the commercial operation allocation group. So it somewhat simplifies the process. It makes it a little bit more complicated for the two remaining, but we thought that was the best way to handle this. And it actually opens the door for energy-only projects that are in operation to get an allocation. So just to kind of go through the more details, projects with an eligible PPA can seek a TPD in the PPA group. Energy-only projects would be considered after the full capacity and the partial capacity delivery status projects, and must have an eligible PPA with a load-serving entity with an RA obligation. All others that don't have a PPA could seek an allocation to the conditional allocation group. This is the group that's the new group we set up in IPE 2023 Track 3, and this process would continue to have the energy-only projects would go after the FCDS and PCDS projects. This does use the same process for retention, to where anybody in the conditional allocation group must, well, basically they get they get an allocation for that one TPD cycle, and they must retain that allocation by the next cycle with a PPA. So basically, these projects operate just the way all other projects would in the conditional allocation group. And this opens the door to all energy-only projects being able to seek an allocation once they go into commercial operation. And we considered, should we put some limits on the number of times that a project could actually seek an allocation? We opted to not have a limit. Kind of thinking there was some projects may try at a certain point in time and use up their allotted number of times they can seek, and then sometime later circumstances change, and such as a new TPP upgrade is put in their area, and now they could get an allocation and be of higher interest under certain circumstances. So we thought at this point in time anyway, we aren't proposing any limits. And then to close this, basically there's no change to the transferability of TPP within the from what was in the final proposal. I will add one. Well, I want to discuss a little bit further. I think it is our thinking that most developers will like this modified proposal. I think the biggest thing that people may have some disagreement about is the order in which an energy-only project in commercial operation can actually get an allocation, either in the PPA group or in the conditional group. And I just wanted to throw out one concern that we had that kind of helped us to, at least within the conditional allocation group, have the energy-only projects be after the FCDS project, is since the project has no limit the number of times they can seek an allocation, a project could come in year after year getting an allocation, but year after year not able to procure or obtain a PPA for their project. And by doing that sort of a process, they could actually tie up some transmission plan deliverability for year after year, and some more viable FCDS projects could be somewhat locked out of getting that amount of capacity. So we thought, at least in that case, it would be best to put them after the FCDS projects. And in the current process that we've been using up until this point in time, energy-only projects up through 2025 have been eligible to seek an allocation in the PPA group, but they have been after the FCDS projects. So that's, that would be consistent with the way that we've been handling it in the past. So at this point, I'll open it up for discussion. Really looking for stakeholder input on thoughts on this.
Thanks, Bob. I do see a hand raised from Susan Schneider. Go ahead, Susan.
Phoenix Consulting. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi. Well, I will say this is a little more elegant proposal, I think, than before, and appreciate your allowing these projects to go into the PPA group and acknowledging that they have come in the past after the FCDS, PCDS projects, and I believe all of the allocation groups actually. So we're thinking about this, but I wanted a clarification on the PPA question. And one of the big points that we went through at great length in our comments and mentioned, I think, and we had a big discussion on the last call, was the issue of having to have a 5-year PPA, with the idea that the CAISO has created conditions where short-term RA is really needed in the market, but then sort of is starting to shut off all these potential sources of short-term RA by requiring everything to be tied up under 5-year PPAs. So we understand what you're doing here with PPAs, and obviously in a PPA group, you need to have a PPA. But it used to be that in the energy, we've argued even in the conditional, or excuse me, the commercial operation group, you shouldn't need a PPA, or certainly you shouldn't need one that's 5 years. So just wondering if you might consider in these groups, the PPA that these projects would have, if it could be a shorter term PPA that might allow for more flexibility in the market for RA, because we just don't have, there is just no, we're shutting off all these sources and really don't have a ready source of all the short term RA that's needed for things like planned outages for RA resources. So maybe if you could we could get your thoughts on that. We'd like to understand why that, if the 5-year limit is still or minimum is still required for these projects, and if why this couldn't be shortened and made more flexible.
So our thinking is, one, to keep it consistent where all PPAs need to be the same. Also, since this was really opened up because load serving entities were the ones that were interested in having this capacity, and all through the stakeholder process, the load serving entities didn't really have any concerns at all with doing a 5-year PPA. If they really felt that they needed a particular project, they were thinking they'd be procuring it for the 5-year period. And I think finally, if we find ourselves short, if a project is able, we do have the interim deliverability process where a project can actually get deliverability for a year and seek it year after year, as long as it's available. So,
well, you don't get that until
mechanism.
I don't understand. If you can't get interim deliverability until you have a TPD allocation, and if you can't get a TPD allocation or keep it unless you have a 5-year PPA, then I'm not sure how you could just come in every year and ask for interim deliverability. Is that, how would that work?
I guess I'll have to look into that. I think it was my understanding that a project in commercial operation could actually get interim deliverability for 1 year.
I don't understand how that would work. I mean, interim deliverability has been if you get a TPD allocation, but all of your upgrades are not finished to allow for your FCDS or PCDS as applicable status. And then in the interim, you could get interim deliverability if it's available. But if you don't have a TPD allocation in the first place, you don't qualify for interim deliverability, as far as I know. And maybe you can find something in the tariff that says otherwise, and I could be wrong, but that's my understanding. So I don't think anybody could come in asking for interim deliverability if they don't get the TPD allocation in the first place, which they need, according to this, a 5-year PPA to keep. So I'm not sure how that would really work.
Okay, well, I'll have to take a double check on that one.
Okay, and it may be that the LSEs, that this will meet their needs, but they're not the ones out there looking for short-term RA for these other purposes. Those are things that developers have to go and find if they have a planned maintenance outage, or if they have any kind of RA shortfalls or anything like that. They're the ones that have to go look for it. They're not the LSEs. So we were hoping that you would, given our big explanation in our comments, that maybe you might take that into account. And the CAISO was going to originally do a phase 2 on the RA enhancements and put in a pool, a pool for, for resources that could be available on that basis, but that never happened. So now there's a requirement, but there's not an easy way to satisfy it.
Yeah, our primary purposes here was to solve the issue that the load serving entities were bringing up, that they wanted to have access to operational energy only projects for their RA needs in order to, essentially fill various gaps they had within their slice of days showings, and that an energy only project could actually help meet. So that was our purpose for doing this.
Yeah, no, and we understand that, but there are other needs besides just the LSE's needs, and we really were hoping that you would at least consider that, and consider that in looking at the PPA requirements here and the terms that are required for it.
Yeah, well, we did consider that, but we chose not to go ahead and open the door for that as well.
Okay. All right. We're disappointed at that. So I have one more question, though, having to do with transferability of deliverability. And we addressed this in I asked this at last meeting, and there was sort of no one really knew the answer. And we really made a point of this in our comments, but didn't see it in the slides here. In terms of the transferability, so we understand now energy only projects can come in, request a TPD allocation, and potentially receive it under these proposed conditions. It seemed logical to us that an energy-only project that reaches COD could get a TPD allocation from another project, including any other project, including a project that was cluster 14 and earlier, but could get an allocation because they're already operational. And like other operational projects, they should be able to get TPD allocations from elsewhere. And we did ask for a clarification on that basis. If you can qualify for a new allocation, which actually reduces deliverability to somebody else, you certainly should be able to get a transfer from some other project that doesn't reduce deliverability for anybody else. So can you clarify that an operational project can get a TPD allocation from other projects once they're operational?
When you say once they're operational?
Okay, we are talking here about energy only projects that reach COD. Okay.
Right. I just want to make sure when you say once they're operational,
I apologize.
Which project were you referring to?
Apologize for the lack of clarification. Once an energy only project that is the subject of this slide becomes operational, they reach COD, can they get a TPD transfer from another project?
Not the other project being operational. So the answer is not from the conditional allocation group.
Not from the conditional allocation group, but if they get, forget about it, let's say they don't even ask for a TPD allocation. They are an energy only project that has reached COD, okay? And
I understand that, Susan. So I'm just saying maybe I need to clarify my statement that
okay,
a non-energy only project that didn't, an FCDS project gets an allocation to conditional allocation group, they can't transfer it to an operational
understood.
project.
Could an energy only project that reaches COD get a TPD transfer from a project that is not in the conditional group, has nothing to do with the conditional group, some other project that has a TPD allocation? Can they get a transfer from another project if they reach COD?
Right. So you're talking about the only other groups that's available are the PPA groups. So a project gets an allocation.
No, this is a project in if a PPA group, how about a cluster 12 project, a cluster 14 project, some other project that has a TPD allocation, okay? Can an energy only project that reaches COD get a TPD transfer from one of those other kinds of projects?
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily focusing on that particular scenario, so we'll be sure to answer that within the final proposal or in this addendum.
Okay, if you could take a look at our comments, we did ask it, I hope in a very clear way, but it did seem logical that if an energy-only project that reaches COD can ask for a brand new allocation in any of these groups, the two groups that are going to be there, that they should be able to get a TPD transfer from any other project. Now, obviously, if you need a PPA, if they're in the PPA group, they have to have a PPA. We get that, okay. But let's say it was a cluster 12 project or a cluster 14 project or any other project that has a TPD allocation, can they receive that allocation? Because it used to be they couldn't even seek a new allocation and they couldn't get a transfer. They had to be energy only forever. So now you're saying they don't have to be energy only forever. They can seek their own allocation in one of these groups. Can they, instead of doing that, can they get just a transfer from a different project that isn't involved in this process? Can they get one of those? And that's the question.
Okay, understood.
Okay, thank you. I mean, yeah, we would definitely appreciate a clarification of that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Next, I have a question received in the chat from Anna LaPrice. I'll go ahead and read that. She wrote, if a project receives a partial allocation, could they apply at a later time for the remaining capacity? And then she followed that with, for clarity, if they get 15 megawatts of deliverability on a 50 megawatt project, can they apply again for the additional 35 megawatts?
The way that we're writing the proposal is we're going to be referring to a project's energy-only capacity. So any project that's not full FCDS could actually seek for an additional allocation for the remaining energy-only portion of the project. So that goes beyond just this case where a project got a partial allocation and seeking more. Any project that has energy-only capacity that is not deliverable within the project can actually seek an additional allocation.
Great, thank you. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat, so I think we can continue.
And right. One other thing I'll just make sure everybody understands is whenever an energy-only project or capacity is being considered, we have to do a study to make sure it's not behind a constraint. So that is an eligibility requirement or an eligibility check that we always do for an energy-only project or energy-only capacity. So that will continue. So just to remind everybody of that. So if there's no other questions or comments for me, I can pass it on to Ryan.
All right. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Ryan Cox with the Q Management team. We can go ahead and move on to the next slide. So as a quick recap, for our portion of this, we were looking for policies that could help with some of the stagnant projects in the queue. We ended up removing the limitation of 3-year COD extension from the draft final. And all we are moving forward with now is the proposal to apply commercial viability criteria, including having a PPA, to all projects, including energy-only projects. So that's the main change from the policy today, is we're applying CVC to energy-only projects, and all projects that can't meet the CVC will be withdrawn. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide. Some of the questions we got on this item, SDG&E asked, how will projects be managed when their COD is unachievable? The Q management team is undertaking an effort this year to establish a new internal process where we'll be reviewing these projects. Each project will be getting a deeper review as to the feasibility of their milestones at least once a year. And so then based on our evaluation of those milestones, we'll reach out to the different entities, confirm those understandings, and then direct projects to submit modifications if necessary. And if we're not getting responses, then that could result in ISO or PTO issuing breach notices. Additionally, ACP, this CVC policy will take effect upon FERC's ruling of IPE 5.0 topics. So as with the usual current practice, any modifications submitted before FERC's ruling on this will be processed under the old CVC guidelines, and then all modifications after that will be processed under the new CVC demonstration requirements. And we also got some comments that we just wanted to clarify. There were some stakeholders that gave comments to the effect of CVC not applying to WDAP projects. And we did want to clarify that it is that the CAISO does not apply CVC to these projects. Each PTO will be applying the CVC to WDAP projects based on their own WDAP tariffs. So are there any questions or comments on this slide? I know there were other concerns that we're going to get to next, but just on the things covered on this specific slide.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple hands raised. First, we have a follow-up question from Susan Schneider. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. Hi, Ryan. I just got just one or two clarifying questions here. The first bullet point here, where you're looking at this annual review, is this where you would address things like projects that have say passed their COD, and you know, those kind of things? Because there are some projects in the queue that seem to be past that. So is this the kind of process you're looking at to try and deal with those things, or identify those, or address them, you know, promptly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those projects would also be reviewed, and again, just to clarify, like, those projects are still currently being reviewed. Obviously, there's a number of situations that can happen in these projects. Most commonly, they're just in the process of modifying their milestones, and it just hasn't been approved yet. So, but yes, with that will be part of this review.
Okay. Appreciate the second bullet and the clarification. I did have a question about the third one also with the WDAP project. Some of the WDAP tariffs, as I recall, say some things like, well, any retention requirements, they don't talk about CVC, but they say any retention requirements are based on the CAISO tariff. So are you assuming that the PTO will enforce something based on the CAISO tariff, or does that mean the CAISO still has to do something? Or it's just a little unclear how would that really work?
Yeah, essentially, we leave it to the PTOs. Again, the CAISO does not apply CVC to WDAP projects. So we leave it to the PTOs to kind of enforce their own WDAP tariff and
if their WDAP tariff defers to the CAISO tariff, is it just sort of no man's land, or what happens with that?
I think I would defer to the PTOs on those for their kind of understanding.
Okay. Yeah, Ryan, it's Jason. I'll just elaborate a little bit on what Ryan said. Yeah, so we defer to the PTOs. We the CAISO and Q management do not get engaged in CVC applicability to WDAP projects when WDAP projects are submitting modification requests or changing their milestones. We generally trust that they're applying the appropriate tariff policy if and when needed. This is certainly raising a question that maybe we, Q management, need to coordinate with the PTOs on to ensure that they're applying it appropriately. I would not frame it as no man's land. I'm wondering if the applicability is not as scrutinized or applied consistently in the WDAP process as it is at the CAISO, but we'll certainly be looking a little bit into that going forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. Okay. That's all I had on this page. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Susan. Next, we have a hand raised from Simrat. Simrat, if you could please state your full name and affiliation. Oh, looks like he lowered his hand. Simrat, if you do still have a question, feel free to raise your hand again and join the queue. Oh, there we go. Can we please unmute Simrat?
Okay. Hey, this is Simrat from SDG&E, Simrat Tasfa Georges from San Diego. We do appreciate CAISO's efforts in, having this additional stakeholder process to clarify some of the initiatives, which we think are a very positive step in the right direction. Regarding the question we have in the chat, right, we acknowledge the fact that, ongoing discussions between the PTOs and the ISO is important as far as when it comes to projects that are either nearing their COD or have passed their COD. However, we do realize that prior, for projects pre-cluster 15, existing projects in the queue, there are some that have already passed their COD. And how is the IPE 5.0 proposal going to be looking at them and have some sort of tariff mechanism to initiate either a withdrawal or get those projects connect? Because the whole point of this effort is really to kind of allow projects that are ready to move on, or withdraw. We just want to understand a little bit of how this would apply to existing projects that are already in the queue, and what tariff mechanism is going to be used for those projects.
Yeah, so as we've discussed, for projects that are currently in the queue, our hope is that this policy will help just make sure that there's movement on these projects and that they are working towards commercial operation, whether they are energy only or have deliverability. Again, for projects that are lapsing on their milestones or which no longer have achievable milestones, our current practice today is when we know a project is behind on their milestones, we do reach out and we coordinate with them to get their milestones updated. Our hope under the process we're developing this year is to kind of be able to look further out at those projects so that we're catching them a little further out from their COD. But as we said, like today we are reviewing these projects and a lot of them already have MMAs underway and are working with us to update their milestones. But if a project wasn't working with us and had lapsed on their milestones, then yes, we would be issuing breach notices in those cases. And so that's kind of the mechanism we would have to move those projects. So looking forward, we're going to have these milestone reviews. We will be able to determine if these projects are on track for their current milestones. If they're not, they will submit modifications. And if those modifications extend beyond 7 years, then they will be required to meet CVC. And if they cannot meet CVC, then they'll be withdrawn under this new policy. And if they can meet CVC, then we will be getting those annual demonstrations. Does that answer your question?
Right. Yeah, that partly does. And maybe I'm, looking at it, the implementation aspect of it, and especially when you have a proposal that's already in flight, that's, trying to address those that are sitting in the queue beyond 7 years from their original IR. Yes, I see that being a valuable step in the new, queue projects coming in. But for the existing ones, we'll be looking forward to how this would be implemented, because we do have, and I do, if you go into the CAISO queue, you do see a lot of projects that have passed their COD or have been in the queue for more than 7 years. The other question I have is, if even for the new proposal, right, if you have a project in almost a year 7, right, that project goes and gets a PPA as an energy only, and this is a question just for understanding, right? If they have a PPA as energy only, right, and then could they later then extend their milestone dates, changing the type of PPA they would have?
So any any PPA that is used to extend milestones and meet CVC has to meet the deliverability, has to match the deliverability status of the project that is using it. So if a project has deliverability and is extending its milestones, we would require that the PPA, be for RA. And if they are energy only, then we would require that the PPA specify that this is an energy only PPA. And again, we have not gotten one up to this point, so I can't say for certain what exactly that would look like, but we would expect some indication on that PPA that it is for energy only. And so the status on the PPA needs to match the status of the project, essentially.
Okay, so but they are allowed to have multiple PPAs, I mean, or different PPAs, so long that the status matches their current deliverability status, right?
Yep.
And I'm trying to tie this with the timing queue aspect of things.
Yes, it's if I'm understanding your question correctly, they can have multiple PPAs as long as the total under those PPAs covers the entirety of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Simrat. Next in the queue, we have a question from Jerry Melcher. Go ahead, Jerry.
Advocate Office. I was wondering if we could maybe look at an example where this CVC is going to play out for projects that go back 2005, 2003 in the queue. Are those ever going to see the light of day, or will these CVC criterion kind of apply it to those and see some, cleaning up of the queue, so to speak?
Yeah, so we have an example later in the slides. It doesn't go that far back, but I can say that this policy will apply to all projects. So even if an energy-only project has, a further out COD today, they may have some more time to kind of get their ducks in a row, but eventually they are going to be held to this CVC standard once we determine that their milestones are no longer achievable. So it won't just be like a day one, all projects are being evaluated. It'll be as their milestones, get within the range that we're able to confidently say that they're no longer achievable, then we will start processing those projects as we kind of make that evaluation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm quite concerned that permitting on some of the generation types that just never pass muster. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue right now, so I think we can continue on, Ryan.
Okay, we can go to the next slide. So another question that came up was around energy-only projects may utilize CVC exception and provide an energy-only PPA within 1 year of modification request. We did kind of determine that, yes, energy-only projects need to provide a energy-only PPA. They can do that the same as projects with deliverability. And we did also add the caveat that if a project has deliverability and they provide an energy-only PPA, that is the one circumstance in which a project would be converted to energy-only instead of withdrawn. So again, just to reiterate, if a project has FCDS or PCDS, but they can only get an energy-only PPA somehow, then in that instance, we would convert them to energy-only. Not sure that we will see that come up, but if it does, we've kind of covered it here based on some of the feedback we received in the comments. And secondly, withdrawal from the queue of FCDS projects seeking COD extensions that do not meet CVC. We did see a comment that there was a comment that it did not seem clear that this was going to apply to projects with TBD, but in our review and going back to previous papers and proposals, we felt that it was very clear that the intention was to apply CVC requirements to all projects and that failure to meet CVC would result in withdrawal. So we did not make any changes there. And then the next couple slides, we're going to be talking about the 1 year exception to use CVC more. So I'd like to save questions for that until we go through those slides. But if there's any questions on the first two bullets here, I'm happy to hear them now.
I'm not seeing any hands raised at this moment.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. So here we have kind of a sample outline of a timeline for a cluster 14 project that entered the queue in 2021 and kind of this is an example of if we allowed a second one-year extension on providing a PPA, kind of what that could do to projects in the queue. So in this example, Cluster 14 project would have entered the queue in 2021 with their current COD being 2029, which gives them 8 years in the queue. At some point, they request a COD extension of 2 years to 2031, which will put them at 10 years in the queue. They submit this request in 2026. They use the 1-year extension, so they don't have to provide a PPA until 2027 after they've been in the queue for 6 years. After this point, they would have to provide that PPA annually as part of the annual demonstrations for CVC. Now, if we allowed a second PPA demonstration, we could have a project submit a new modification request for a COD in that should be 2033, sorry. So they would be in the queue for 12 years, still having that annual PPA demonstration requirement. They would submit that request in 2029, which would mean they wouldn't have to provide a PPA till 2030. So after 9 years in the queue, they're still being allowed extensions to provide PPAs. We do not feel that that is a reasonable timeline for projects to be acquiring PPAs, and we do understand that extensions happen and there are delays, and we'll cover some of those issues in the next slide. But we have a large number of projects that have already been able to provide PPAs and have been continually managing to do so. So we do not think that more than one PPA extension for providing a PPA is really necessary. Could we go to the next slide? And then just, again, to reiterate all the points, it's expected that if there is an issue, there's a COD, we're expecting projects should be working with their off-takers immediately to kind of update those CODs and then still be meeting CVC. Providing all projects in the queue more chances to remain in the queue is not productive to the ongoing cluster studies. Again, the entire purpose of this policy was to kind of get rid of those projects that are lingering in the queue. And we feel that too many opportunities to kind of delay the providing of a PPA doesn't really work towards that goal. More projects will continue to enter the queue to ensure long-term development. And again, we have the the annual demonstration. So once a project meets CVC, it has to continue providing a PPA on an annual basis anyway. So there really shouldn't be a need for a second use of the 1-year exception. And I think that is especially emphasized by the fact that we have not received a request for a project to use the 1-year exception twice. It hasn't happened, so we really don't see this as being needed for project development. But we did want to add, as the last bullet here, that when a project receives an exempt COD extension, which is what we now call what was formerly known as a PTO or ISO extension, the project will be exempt from the next annual CVC demonstration so that they can have proper time to update that PPA, but then still be held to those requirements. So there I'll pause and take any questions we have.
Yeah, so we have a hand raised from Susan Schneider. Go ahead, Susan.
Hi, Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I would say I understand your position here, but the only reason that Cluster 14 example looks like it does is because you've got an 8-year development timeline, part of which was an extra year to take the Cluster 14 studies to be finished. But I'm going to leave that alone. My main point here is on the last bullet. First of all, what is now called an exempt COD extension has always been exempt. So if a project gets a delay simply because what used to be called a PTO delay, and I guess now it's PTO ISO extension, but now it's an exempt COD extension. When a project got a delay that was not anything to do with what they did, but simply having to do with upgrades, that project was supposed to be exempt from CVC completely, and didn't have a PPA requirement unless they had one for retention already. So this seems like a brand new proposal. If a project gets a delay beyond 7 years for a PTO, or even less than 7 years, this was, I mean, this is what you've got here is the whole explanation of this proposal. Okay, first of all, does this apply when a project gets? What is the reason for imposing an additional requirement on a project when they receive a COD delay that has nothing to do with anything they did?
So I think the intent here is that projects, we understand that these kind of extensions happen and that projects need to be able to have that opportunity to kind of adapt and update their information based on the new timelines. But we didn't want projects to just have, you know, a free pass of there was an extension, unexpected extension, therefore, you know, this CVC doesn't apply. I think we have the demonstration that these projects are trying to achieve their commercial operation. They've provided their PPA. Our understanding is that these projects still want to achieve commercial operation, and so they should be updating these PPAs in order to do so.
So is this, I guess I'm not understanding this proposal. Is this proposal supposed to be a benefit, like they already have a PPA demonstration that they annually have to meet, and therefore they're just going to get a pass for 1 year if in addition to that they get a PTO, excuse me, a exempt COD extension, so this is a benefit to them because 1 year they get to skip? Or does this impose an additional requirement on someone that doesn't otherwise have a PPA demonstration that they have to meet, like maybe they're not even beyond 7 years, or they haven't requested a COD extension beyond 7 years? This is unclear, and well, anyway, could you answer that question, please?
Yeah, so the intention here is, again, it's for projects that have met that CVC demonstration, that have had to, you know, provide the permitting and the PPA and all the other documentation. But then while they are in the process of providing those annual demonstrations.
I
Hello?
think we lost your audio for a second there.
Today, there is no...
Ryan.
You were losing me, Ryan.
Oh.
Maybe you can't hear us.
Sorry. I can hear you now.
Ryan,
I
are
think
you
I'm back.
able to switch your audio?
Yes, I will switch my audio. One moment.
Thanks.
We're losing some.
Really quick, while Ryan's switching audio, I'll keep the conversation going. Yeah, so Susan, this applies to the former of what your two scenarios that you played out, right?
Okay, so
I'll
this
start
is if
with the
they
latter,
already
just to clarify.
Okay,
That's
this is if
correct,
they already
yeah.
have an annual CVC demonstration. This gives them a free pass if they, in addition to that, get a PTO, or excuse me, an exempt COD extension. So this is not a new proposal for anybody that gets an exempt COD extension. This is only if they're already in this process. Okay, that would be really good to clarify, because when I first... Okay.
In the paper, yeah.
Okay. When I first read this,
we'll tell the story in the paper. Yep.
Okay. Because it sounded when I read this like this is to apply to anybody who gets a COD exempt COD extension. Now all of a sudden they've got some PPA requirement, but maybe they didn't already have it. This is if they already have it. They simply get a little bit of an extra time to adapt, and that's what you're talking about.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to clarify, the exempt extension, and to use the word you used a minute ago, like this is absolutely a benefit to the project when an exempt extension is provided. Yeah, because otherwise the PP, like you might have an annual demonstration 3 months after you receive the PPO
that totally makes sense
to the project, right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So we saw that gap and we wanted to clear it so that we allow the project to, allow the project more time to update that PPA with the off-taker and provide it through the annual demonstration. They're still responsible for the annual demonstration. We're just skipping that one, but we'll reapply it in the next cycle. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to clarify some terminology. Okay, good. Yeah. Just to clarify some terminology used. Yeah, absolutely. just to be clear, an exempt extension doesn't mean that a project is exempt forever. It just means
Right.
that a project, when you receive an exempt extension, is exempt from policy at that time, meaning
Yes.
because the COD is extending, CVC is not applicable at that time, or whatever other policy applies at that time. Yeah, okay, I just want to make sure we were clear on that.
Okay, so it
Ryan,
sounds
are
like
you
they're
back?
exempt. They're exempt from the entire demonstration because they have to update maybe their permits, and they have to update. I mean, there are a lot of things. They would have to update some potentially the other stuff too. If they had site exclusivity, they might have to update their land control, and they have to, do to all of that would have to be accommodated. So basically, they're just going to skip the next one altogether, and then have to make the complete demonstration the time after.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay.
And so,
All right.
I mean, just to continue the example, and Ryan and I chatted through what this might look like. If let's say annual CVC demonstration is due on March 15th of any given year, and a PTO extension or exempt extension is provided to the project on March 10th of that year,
Right.
technically that project would get 1 year, 1 year to provide the PPA, so they wouldn't be required in that cycle, but they would get 1 year. If the exempt extension is provided on March 20th, they would technically get 2 full years. If you follow the logic, they would skip the next year and then get the full next year. So we don't expect to issue these reports on, in days before or after the CDC demonstration is required, but you never know what can happen.
But if you do, then at least they would have it.
That's
Okay.
right.
Okay. Thank you very much for the explanation. And yeah, if you could really explain that well in the final proposal. Is there going to be a the final proposal will be a complete document? You're going to update the whole document. It would really be helpful if you would do that.
We will elaborate and tell the story. Yep. Ryan, are you back? Do you want to jump in?
It would be helpful if you could put together, and this, I know you've done this a few times in the past, and it really has helped, where you put out a red line version and then a clean version, and then that's something everybody can refer to later if they need to, instead of trying to find part of it here and then there's an amendment somewhere else. And it would be great to have a red line and then a clean, comprehensive document that we can use as a reference.
Yeah, Susan, when you think red line, just so we're on the same page, are you thinking a red line between the final proposal and revised final proposal?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
Yes,
Danielle.
please.
Yeah, I just want to clarify on that too, Susan. It's helpful feedback, but I think we are planning to make this an addendum to the final proposal. So we'll just have redlined these 2 sections that we're changing will be in red line form from what's in the final proposal, but we weren't going to reissue the whole document.
Okay, it would be helpful if you could do that, but at least what you're saying, it would be also helpful. But okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll do our best.
All right, appreciate it.
Although Bob, just to speak up, my section on energy-only projects, getting deliverability, it's going to be a significant new change. So I don't plan on redlining that. I'll just provide the new proposal.
Okay, so this will all come in. So there'll be an amendment or I forgot what you called it, but there'll be some amendment or a supplement.
We're going to do an addendum. And the purpose will be just to cover these 2 topics. The other topics will not be covered.
Okay, so your section will be like a new section, and then the other ones might have red lines in them.
I have to leave it up to Jason and Ryan on how they can accomplish that. Sounds like they can accomplish it much easier than I can.
Yeah, I think I could even just see us adding clarification of this bottom bullet, in blue. And then I think if we change any of the wording or anything of the proposal above, we'll just highlight it in blue, and rather than doing like a full strike red line structure, we'll make it as simple as possible for stakeholders to read and understand the difference between the final proposal and this revised addendum.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you, Susan. Before I take the next question, I just want to check, Ryan, do we have you back?
Yep, I am back. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, sound coming through well. Next, we have a question from Vineet Marat. Go ahead, Vineet.
Hi, this is Vineet from Clearway Energy. I have some questions regarding the CVC demonstration discussion, especially when projects receive exempt COD extension, which is like upgrade extension sort of thing. So as an example, let's say a project is set to COD next year, like 2027. It has a PPA ready to go for 2027. In past, it has demonstrated that it has a 27 PPA. And now if it gets a PTO extension saying that the upgrade won't be completed until 5 more years, let's call it like 2032, for example, is the new proposed. So under current rules, the project COD gets updated to 2032, and the project is not required to show CVC unless project is asking for an extension beyond 2032. Is that correct under current rules?
At the time of the extension, the project is not required to meet CVC for an exempt COD extension. If they had already used CVC in a previous extension, under the current rules, they would still be subject to the annual demonstration. And that's kind of what this last bullet is addressing, is that if they have already met CVC and then receive an exempt COD extension, then we would essentially not require them to make that annual demonstration at the next opportunity. In this case, it would be 2026, but they would still be required to then resume their annual demonstrations the year after that, if that makes sense.
Right. But under current rule, let's say a project has a PPA for 2027, and then it has used CVC in past to stay in queue essentially, but today it receives like a 5-year delay to like a 2032 COD. Under current rules, is the project required to demonstrate CVC till 2032?
Yeah, so under current rules, there is no exception for annual demonstration, so it would still be required to meet that annual demonstration.
Okay, I see. So that's where this is an improvement.
Yes.
Because it gives 1 year for the projects to get a new PPA and whatnot. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vineet. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in at this time. So Ryan, did you have some final thoughts before we switch back over to Danielle?
No, I appreciate everybody's feedback and the questions, and I think it was a good discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Next, I'll turn it back over to Danielle to go over some next steps for our schedule.
Okay, thanks everyone. And thanks, Christina. We appreciate all the discussion today. We are really hoping to get this right in this next final addendum. So if you could please, if you have any major concerns with the proposals that we've presented to you today, if you could please email us and copy ISO Stakeholder Affairs by Wednesday at noon, just with major concerns that you think warrant us not moving forward with these proposals. That would be great. We will have, once we put out the final addendum or the revised final proposal, we will have a round of comment on those. Those will be due on March 16th. And then we do plan to take this to the Board of Governors on April 30th for a decision. This is, we did push this out roughly a month and a half, almost 2 months, because we want to get this right. But we are also coming up against a pretty tight deadline of wanting to get these filed so that we can have some of these changes take effect this year. So please do let us know if you have major concerns that need to be addressed in this next final addendum by Wednesday, and then file comments on March 16th on the final proposal, the revised final proposal. And with that, I will hand it back to Christina for the broader next steps, and really appreciate all of your engagement and participation today. Thanks.
Thanks, Danielle. I just have a couple quick next steps before we wrap up the call for today. Here are some of those immediate upcoming dates that Danielle just mentioned one more time. And then if you have any questions, you can also always reach out to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com. And for any additional information or to find the meeting materials, please visit the IPE 5.0 initiative webpage. And now I just have some quick announcements. Here you can see some of the stakeholder meetings, comment deadlines, and trainings occurring at the ISO this week. And here are some details on market simulation meetings and business practice manual updates. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see some of our latest blog posts. And so with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's meeting. As a reminder, this meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and all meeting materials are available on the initiative webpage, and the video recording will be posted there soon as well. We thank you very much for your engagement, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks. Bye-bye.